The alien widow was declared property, but the human fought to make her free.
The air in the grand hall of the imperial palace was thick with the scent of incense and the metallic tang of fear. The high, arched ceilings echoed with the murmurs of courtiers, their voices a low hum that seemed to vibrate through the very bones of the structure. The walls, carved from obsidian and inlaid with veins of gold, gleamed faintly in the flickering light of hovering luminescent orbs. It was a place of opulence and power, a monument to the Empire's dominance over the galaxy. But for Zanara, it was a gilded cage. She stood in the center of the hall, her head held high despite the weight of the chains around her wrists. Her skin, a deep shade of indigo with faint bioluminescent patterns that glimmered like starlight, marked her as one of the Crithians, a race known for their fierce independence and warrior culture. Her long, silver hair cascaded down her back, unbound and untamed, a stark contrast to the rigid order of the imperial court. Her eyes, a piercing violet, burned with a quiet defiance as she faced the imperial magistrate, a towering figure clad in robes of crimson and black. By the decree of the Galactic Imperium, the magistrate intoned, his voice booming through the hall, the widow of the traitor Cryos is hereby declared property of the Empire, along with her offspring. They are spoils of war, to be disposed of as the Imperium sees fit. A murmur rippled through the crowd, a mix of approval and unease. Zanara's jaw tightened, but she did not flinch. She had known this moment would come. Her husband, Cryos, had been a warlord who dared to challenge the Empire's expansion into the Outer Rim. His death in battle had left her and their young son, Lyran, vulnerable. Now, they were nothing more than trophies, symbols of the Empire's unyielding might. Her gaze flicked to the corner of the hall, where Lyran stood, small and fragile, his tiny hands clutching the hem of a servant's robe. His wide, silver eyes were filled with confusion and fear, and Zanara's heart ached for him. She had promised Cryos she would protect their son, no matter the cost. But how could she keep that promise when they were both prisoners? As the magistrate continued to drone on, listing the terms of her servitude, Zanara's attention was drawn to a figure standing at the edge of the crowd. He was human, a rarity in the imperial court, and his presence was as out of place as a spark in the void. Tall and lean, with dark hair and sharp, observant eyes, he stood with an air of quiet confidence that set him apart from the sycophants and bureaucrats around him. His name, she would later learn, was Elias Vera, a diplomat from one of the few human colonies that had managed to maintain a fragile alliance with the Empire. Elias's gaze met hers, and for a moment, the noise of the hall seemed to fade away. There was something in his eyes, a flicker of empathy, a spark of rebellion, that stirred something deep within her. It was a look that said he saw her not as property, not as a spoil of war, but as a person, a warrior, a mother. The magistrate's voice broke the moment. The widow will serve in the imperial household, under the supervision of the court steward. Her offspring will be placed in the care of the imperial creche, where he will be raised to serve the Empire. Zanara's hands clenched into fists, the chains rattling softly. She wanted to scream, to fight, to tear the magistrate's throat out with her bare hands. But she knew it would be futile. The Empire's guards surrounded her, their weapons trained on her with cold precision. She was outnumbered, outmatched, and utterly alone. As the guards led her away, she cast one last glance at Elias. He was still watching her, his expression unreadable. She didn't know if he was an ally or just another pawn in the Empire's game. But in that moment, she allowed herself a sliver of hope. If there was even the slightest chance he could help her, she would take it. The days that followed were a blur of humiliation and despair. Zanara was stripped of her armor, the ceremonial garb of a Crithian warrior, and forced into the plain, drab uniform of a servant. Her duties were menial, cleaning, serving, bowing to the whims of the imperial elite. But it was the separation from Lyran that cut the deepest. She saw him only once, through a barred window in the creche, his small face pressed against the glass as he reached out for her. The guards had dragged her away before she could speak to him, and the memory of his cries haunted her every night. It was during one of her tasks, polishing the endless array of imperial relics in the palace's grand gallery, that Elias found her. He entered the room quietly, his footsteps barely audible on the polished floor. Zanara tensed, her instincts on high alert, but she did not look up. She had learned to be invisible, to avoid drawing attention to herself. "You don't belong here," Elias said, his voice low but firm. Zanara's hands stilled, the cloth she was holding hovering over the surface of a gilded statue. She glanced at him, her violet eyes narrowing. "And where do I belong? Human? In a cage? On an auction block?" Elias stepped closer, his gaze steady. "You belong with your son. Free." Her breath caught in her throat, but she quickly masked her reaction. "And what would you know of freedom? You serve the same masters as I do." "I serve the people," Elias replied, his voice tinged with bitterness. "Or at least I try to. The Empire may have my loyalty, but it does not have my soul." Zanara studied him, searching for any sign of deceit. But all she saw was sincerity and something else, a determination that mirrored her own. "Why are you here?" she asked finally. "Because I can't stand by and watch this injustice," Elias said. "Because I believe you deserve better. And because," he hesitated, then added softly, "because I see the fire in you, Zanara. And I know what it's like to feel it burn." For the first time since her capture, Zanara felt a flicker of something other than despair. It was small, fragile, but it was there. Hope. The Imperial archives were a labyrinth of towering shelves, each one crammed with data crystals, ancient scrolls, and holographic records that glowed faintly in the dim light. The air was cool and dry, preserved to protect the fragile artifacts of the Empire's long and bloody history. Elias Vera moved through the shadows with practiced ease, his footsteps silent on the polished stone floor. He had spent countless hours here, poring over treaties, laws, and decrees, searching for the tools he needed to navigate the treacherous waters of imperial politics. But tonight his purpose was different. Tonight, he was searching for a way to undo an injustice. The image of Zanara lingered in his mind, her indigo skin glowing faintly in the dim light of the grand gallery, her violet eyes filled with a mixture of defiance and despair. She was a warrior, a queen in her own right, reduced to a servant in the Empire's gilded prison. And her son, Lyran, was just a child, innocent and vulnerable. Elias had seen the way the imperial court treated its captives, the way it stripped them of their dignity and humanity. He couldn't let that happen to them. He reached a secluded alcove deep within the archives, where a single terminal hummed softly. The screen flickered to life as he activated it, casting a pale blue light across his face. His fingers danced over the keys, pulling up records of ancient laws and forgotten statutes. The Empire's legal system was a tangled web of contradictions, designed to maintain control while giving the illusion of fairness. But Elias knew that within that web, there were threads that could be pulled, loopholes that could be exploited. Hours passed as he sifted through the data, his focus unwavering. Finally, he found what he was looking for, an obscure statute from the early days of the Empire, buried under layers of amendments and revisions. It was called the Edict of Redemption, a law that allowed war captives to petition for their freedom if they could prove their value to the Empire. The law had been used sparingly and never in recent memory, but it was still on the books. And that was all Elias needed. The next morning, the Imperial Council convened in the Hall of Ascendancy, a vast chamber adorned with banners and trophies from countless conquests. The counselors sat in a semicircle on a raised dais, their faces obscured by the shadows of their hooded robes. At the center of the dais sat the Imperial Regent, a figure of cold authority whose every word carried the weight of law. Elias stood before them, his posture erect, his expression calm. He had dressed carefully for the occasion, his diplomatic uniform immaculate, the silver insignia of his rank gleaming on his chest. He knew that appearances mattered in the imperial court, and he needed every advantage he could get. "Esteemed counselors," he began, his voice steady and clear, "I come before you today to petition for the redemption of a war captive, one whose skills and knowledge could be of great value to the Empire." The counselors murmured among themselves, their voices low and skeptical. The regent raised a hand, silencing them. Speak, Diplomat Vera. Who is this captive, and what value do they offer? Her name is Zenara, Elias said, widow of the warlord Cryos. She is a Crithian, a race renowned for their strategic prowess and combat skills. Her knowledge of Cryos' tactics and the inner workings of his forces could prove invaluable in our ongoing campaigns in the Outer Rim. The counselors exchanged glances, their interest piqued. The Empire's expansion into the Outer Rim had been met with fierce resistance, and any advantage was worth considering. And what of her offspring? One of the counselors asked, his voice dripping with disdain. Surely, a child has no value to the Empire. Elias hesitated, choosing his words carefully. The child is young, but he is of Crithian blood. With proper training, he could become a loyal servant of the Empire, a symbol of our benevolence and strength. The regent leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. And what guarantee do we have that this Zenara will cooperate? She is the widow of a traitor, after all. Elias met the regent's gaze without flinching. I will personally oversee her integration into the imperial household. If she proves uncooperative, I will take full responsibility. The counselors conferred in hushed tones, their voices a low hum of deliberation. Finally, the regent spoke. Very well. We will grant a trial period of 3 lunar cycles. During that time, Zenara will assist in our strategic planning. If she proves her worth, she and her offspring will be granted limited freedoms under imperial supervision. If not, he left the threat unspoken, but the implication was clear. Elias bowed his head, hiding the relief that threatened to show on his face. Thank you, esteemed counselors. I will ensure that Zenara understands the gravity of this opportunity. That evening, Elias found Zenara in the palace gardens, a secluded oasis of lush greenery and fragrant blooms. She was kneeling by a fountain, her hands submerged in the cool water, her expression distant. The chains around her wrists were gone, replaced by a single, thin bracelet that marked her as a probationary servant. It was a small improvement, but it was a start. Zenara, Elias said softly, not wanting to startle her. She looked up, her violet eyes narrowing as she recognized him. What do you want, human? I've secured a trial period for you, he said, stepping closer. 3 lunar cycles to prove your value to the Empire. If you succeed, you and Lyran will be granted limited freedoms. Zenara rose to her feet, water dripping from her hands. And if I fail? Elias hesitated, then said, let's not think about that. This is your chance, Zenara. Your chance to fight back, to protect your son. She studied him, her gaze piercing. Why are you doing this? What do you gain from helping me? Elias met her eyes, his expression earnest. Because it's the right thing to do. Because I've seen what the Empire does to people, and I can't stand by and let it happen to you. For a long moment, Zenara said nothing. Then slowly she nodded. What do I need to do? Elias smiled, a small but genuine expression of relief. I'll train you, teach you how to navigate the imperial court, how to present yourself as an asset. It won't be easy, but if anyone can do it, it's you. Zenara's lips curved into a faint smile, the first he had seen from her. Then let's begin. The imperial palace was a place of shadows and secrets, its grandeur masking the rot that festered within its walls. For Zenara, every corridor, every chamber, was a reminder of her captivity. But now, for the first time since her capture, she felt a flicker of hope. That hope came in the form of Elias Vera, the human diplomat who had risked everything to give her a chance at freedom. Their days were filled with intense preparation. Elias had secured a small, private chamber in the palace's east wing, away from prying eyes. It was here that he trained Zenara in the intricacies of imperial politics, teaching her how to navigate the treacherous waters of the court. They spent hours poring over holographic maps and tactical reports, discussing strategies and counter-strategies. Zenara's mind was sharp, her instincts honed by years of warfare, and she absorbed the information with a hunger that surprised even Elias. But it wasn't just strategy they discussed. In the quiet moments between lessons, they shared stories of their pasts. Zanara spoke of her life on Krithos, of the rolling violet plains and the towering crystalline cities. She spoke of Kryos, her husband, and the love they had shared, a love that had been forged in the fires of battle. Elias, in turn, told her of his homeworld, a small colony on the edge of human space, and of the ideals that had driven him to become a diplomat. They were from different worlds, different cultures, but in those moments, they found common ground. One evening, as the twin moons of the imperial capital cast their silvery light through the chamber's high windows, Elias handed Zanara a data crystal. "This is the latest intelligence report from the Outer Rim," he said. "The Empire is planning a major offensive against the remaining Crithian forces. If we can use this information to our advantage, it could be the key to proving your value." Zanara took the crystal, her fingers brushing against his. The contact was brief, but it sent a spark of electricity through both of them. They had been careful to maintain a professional distance, but the tension between them was undeniable. It was in the way their eyes lingered a moment too long, the way their voices softened when they spoke to each other. It was a dangerous game they were playing, one that could cost them everything. "Thank you," Zanara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "For everything." Elias nodded, his expression serious. "We're not out of the woods yet. The council is watching us closely. We need to be careful." Zanara's gaze hardened. "I've spent my entire life being careful. But sometimes caution isn't enough. Sometimes you have to take a risk." Elias studied her, his eyes searching hers. "What are you saying?" Zanara took a step closer, her voice low and intense. "I'm saying that if we're going to do this, we need to be all in. No half measures. No holding back." Elias felt his breath catch in his throat. He knew what she was asking, what she was offering. It was a leap of faith, a commitment to something greater than themselves. And in that moment, he knew he couldn't refuse. "All right," he said, his voice steady. "We're all in." The next day, Zanara was summoned to the war chamber, a vast, circular room dominated by a massive holographic display of the galaxy. The Imperial counselors were gathered around the display, their faces grim as they discussed the upcoming offensive. Zanara stood at the edge of the room, her posture erect, her expression calm. She was dressed in a simple but elegant gown, the fabric a deep shade of blue that complemented her indigo skin. She looked every bit the warrior queen, and the counselors couldn't help but take notice. "Zanara," the regent said, his voice cold and commanding. "You claim to have knowledge that could aid us in our campaign. Speak." Zanara stepped forward, her movements graceful and deliberate. "The Crithian forces are not as disorganized as you believe," she said, her voice clear and confident. "They have been using the asteroid fields in the Outer Rim as cover, launching hit-and-run attacks on your supply lines. If you continue to underestimate them, you will lose more than just ships and soldiers. You will lose the war." The counselors murmured among themselves, their expressions a mix of skepticism and interest. One of them, a tall, gaunt figure with piercing green eyes, stepped forward. "And how do you propose we counter this threat?" Zanara activated the holographic display, her fingers moving deftly over the controls. The map shifted, zooming in on a cluster of asteroids. "Here," she said, pointing to a specific location. "This is where they are hiding. If you launch a coordinated strike, using stealth ships to flank them, you can trap them and destroy their fleet in one decisive blow." The counselors leaned in, their eyes fixed on the display. It was a bold strategy, one that required precision and timing. But it was also a strategy that could turn the tide of the war. The regent studied Zanara for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then slowly he nodded. "Very well. We will consider your proposal. But know this, Zanara. If you are deceiving us, the consequences will be severe." Zanara met his gaze without flinching. "I understand." That night, Zanara and Elias met in the palace gardens, the same secluded spot where they had first begun their alliance. The air was thick with the scent of blooming flowers, and the soft sound of the fountain provided a soothing backdrop to their conversation. "You were incredible today," Elias said, his voice filled with admiration. The council was impressed. I could see it in their eyes. Zanara smiled faintly. It's not over yet. They're still testing me, waiting for me to make a mistake. Elias reached out, his hand brushing against hers. You won't. I believe in you, Zanara, more than I've ever believed in anyone. Zanara's breath hitched at his touch, her heart pounding in her chest. She had spent so long building walls around herself, protecting herself from the pain of loss and betrayal. But with Elias, those walls were beginning to crumble. Elias, she said softly, her voice trembling. I don't know what's happening between us, but I know that I can't do this alone. I need you. Elias's eyes softened, his hand tightening around hers. You're not alone, Zanara. Not anymore. In that moment, the tension between them finally broke. Zanara stepped closer, her body pressing against his, and their lips met in a kiss that was both tender and fierce. It was a kiss born of desperation and hope, of two souls finding solace in each other amidst the chaos of their lives. But even as they lost themselves in each other, they knew that their time was limited. The Empire's spies were everywhere, and their every move was being watched. They couldn't afford to let their guard down, not even for a moment. The Imperial Palace was a place of cold beauty, its polished obsidian walls reflecting the faint glow of hovering luminescent orbs. But beneath its grandeur lay a labyrinth of secrets, a web of intrigue where every whisper could be a weapon and every smile a mask. For Zanara, the palace had become a prison within a prison, a gilded cage where every move was watched, every word analyzed. And now, the Empire's wrath was closing in. The spy had been meticulous, their report detailed and damning. They had observed Zanara and Elias Vera in the gardens, their clandestine meeting captured in holographic images that left no room for doubt. The images were delivered to the Imperial Regent in the dead of night, and by morning, the palace was alive with tension. Zanara awoke to the sound of heavy footsteps outside her chamber. She sat up, her instincts screaming danger, just as the door burst open. A squad of Imperial guards stormed in, their weapons drawn, their faces grim. Before she could react, they seized her, their grip unyielding. What is the meaning of this? She demanded, her voice sharp with anger. By order of the Imperial Regent, one of the guards said, his tone devoid of emotion. You are to be taken into custody for treason. Zanara's heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to show fear. She had faced death before, and she would face it again with dignity. As the guards dragged her from the chamber, she caught a glimpse of Elias in the hallway, his face pale with shock. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and in that moment, she saw the depth of his despair. He had tried to protect her, and now he had failed. Elias watched helplessly as Zanara was taken away, his mind racing. He had known the risks, known that their relationship could not remain hidden forever. But he had hoped for more time, more opportunities to secure her freedom. Now, time had run out. He turned and hurried through the palace corridors, his thoughts a whirlwind of fear and determination. He needed to act quickly, before the Empire could tighten its grip. There was only one place he could turn now: the rebel faction, a shadowy group of dissidents who had long opposed the Empire's tyranny. They were dangerous allies, but they were the only ones who could help him now. The meeting place was a derelict warehouse on the outskirts of the capital, its walls crumbling, its windows shattered. Elias moved through the shadows, his senses on high alert. He had arranged the meeting through a series of encrypted messages, but he knew better than to trust anyone completely. The rebels were waiting for him, their faces obscured by hoods and masks. Their leader, a tall figure with a voice like gravel, stepped forward. You're taking a big risk coming here, Diplomat Vera, he said. The Empire doesn't take kindly to traitors. I'm not here for myself, Elias replied, his voice steady. I'm here for Zanara. She's been arrested, and if we don't act quickly, she'll be executed. The rebel leader studied him for a long moment, then nodded. We've heard of her, the Crithian widow. She's valuable to us, but helping her won't be easy. The Empire's prisons are impenetrable. Nothing is impenetrable, Elias said, his eyes burning with determination. Not if you're willing to pay the price. The rebel leader smiled faintly. And what price are you willing to pay, Diplomat Vera? Elias met his gaze without flinching. Anything. Zanara was taken to the Imperial Detention Center, a fortress of steel and stone that loomed over the capital like a grim sentinel. The guards stripped her of her gown, replacing it with a plain, gray jumpsuit, and led her to a cell deep within the facility. The cell was small and cold, the walls lined with damp stone, the only light coming from a flickering bulb in the ceiling. She sat on the narrow cot, her mind racing. She knew what awaited her: interrogation, torture, and eventually execution. But she also knew that Elias would not abandon her. He would come for her, no matter the cost. Hours passed, or perhaps days. It was hard to tell in the windowless cell. Finally, the door creaked open, and two guards entered, dragging her to her feet. They led her down a series of corridors to an interrogation room, where a figure in a black hood waited. "Zanara," the figure said, their voice cold and mocking. "You've caused quite a stir. The Regent is very interested in what you have to say." Zanara said nothing, her expression impassive. She had been trained to withstand interrogation, to endure pain without breaking. But as the figure stepped closer, she felt a flicker of unease. There was something familiar about them, something that sent a chill down her spine. The figure removed their hood, revealing a face that made Zanara's blood run cold. It was Kale, a former ally of Cryo's, a man she had once called friend. But now, his eyes were filled with malice, his smile cruel. "Hello, Zanara," he said. "It's been a long time." Elias moved through the detention center's ventilation system, his movements slow and deliberate. The rebels had provided him with a detailed map of the facility. But even so, the risk was immense. One wrong move, and he would be caught. He reached a grate overlooking Zanara's cell and peered through the slats. She was sitting on the cot, her head bowed, her shoulders slumped. She looked exhausted, but her spirit was unbroken. Elias felt a surge of admiration and determination. He would not let her down. He dropped silently into the cell, his landing soft and soundless. Zanara looked up, her eyes widening in surprise. "Elias," she whispered, "what are you doing here?" "I'm getting you out of here," he replied, his voice low and urgent. "But we need to move quickly." Zanara nodded, her expression hardening. She was a warrior, and she knew when to act. Together, they moved to the door, where Elias used a stolen key card to disable the lock. The door slid open, and they stepped into the corridor. The escape was a blur of tension and adrenaline. They moved through the facility like shadows, avoiding guards and security systems with practiced ease. But as they reached the final checkpoint, they were confronted by a squad of guards, their weapons trained on them. "Stop right there," one of the guards barked. "You're not going anywhere." Elias stepped forward, his hands raised. "Let her go," he said. "She's innocent." The guard sneered. "Innocent? She's a traitor, and so are you." In that moment, Zanara acted. She moved with the speed and precision of a predator, disarming the guards and incapacitating them before they could react. Elias stared at her in awe, his heart pounding. "Let's go," she said, her voice calm but urgent. They burst out of the detention center into the cold night air, the city lights glowing in the distance. But their freedom was short-lived. As they ran through the streets, they heard the sound of sirens, the Empire's forces closing in. The abandoned building was a crumbling relic of a bygone era, its walls scarred by time and neglect. The air inside was thick with dust, and the faint glow of the city's lights filtered through broken windows, casting jagged shadows on the floor. Zanara and Elias crouched in the darkness, their breath shallow, their senses on high alert. The sound of sirens echoed in the distance, a constant reminder that the Empire's forces were closing in. "We can't stay here," Elias whispered, his voice tense. "They'll find us." Zanara nodded, her violet eyes scanning the room. "We need a plan, something they won't expect." Elias pulled out a small holographic map, the blue light illuminating their faces. "The rebels have a safe house on the outskirts of the city. If we can get there, we'll have a chance." Zanara studied the map, her mind racing. "It's too far. We'll never make it on foot." Elias hesitated, then said, "There's an old transport hub nearby. If we can commandeer a speeder, we might be able to lose them. Zanara's lips curved into a faint smile. Then let's move. The streets of the imperial capital were a maze of towering skyscrapers and narrow alleys, the air filled with the hum of hovering vehicles and the chatter of late-night crowds. Zanara and Elias moved through the shadows, their movements swift and silent. They kept to the less-traveled paths, avoiding the main thoroughfares where Imperial patrols were most active. As they approached the transport hub, they saw a pair of Imperial guards stationed at the entrance, their weapons at the ready. Zanara's eyes narrowed, her hand instinctively reaching for a weapon she no longer carried. "We'll have to take them out," she whispered. Elias shook his head. "Too risky. If they raise the alarm, we'll be surrounded." Zanara's gaze flicked to a nearby maintenance hatch. "What about that?" Elias followed her gaze, his eyes lighting up with an idea. "It's worth a shot." They moved to the hatch, Elias using a stolen key card to disable the lock. The hatch creaked open, revealing a narrow tunnel that led into the transport hub. They slipped inside, the darkness enveloping them. The tunnel was cramped and damp, the air thick with the smell of oil and machinery. They moved quickly, their footsteps muffled by the soft hum of the hub systems. Finally, they reached a grate that overlooked the main hangar. The hangar was a vast space filled with speeders and transport pods, their sleek designs a testament to the Empire's technological prowess. A handful of technicians moved about, their attention focused on their work. "There," Elias said, pointing to a speeder near the edge of the hangar. "That's our ticket out of here." Zanara nodded. "Let's move." They dropped silently into the hangar, their movements swift and precise. They reached the speeder without incident, Elias quickly disabling the security system while Zanara kept watch. Just as Elias was about to start the engine, a voice rang out. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Zanara turned to see a technician staring at them, his expression a mix of confusion and alarm. Without hesitation, she moved, closing the distance between them in an instant. She struck him with a precise blow to the temple, knocking him unconscious. "Let's go," she said, her voice calm but urgent. Elias started the engine, the speeder humming to life. They shot out of the hangar, the wind whipping through their hair as they sped through the city streets. The Empire's forces were quick to respond. Within minutes, they were being pursued by a squadron of Imperial speeders, their weapons firing bursts of energy that lit up the night sky. "Hold on!" Elias shouted, his hands gripping the controls as he maneuvered through the narrow streets. Zanara leaned out of the speeder, her eyes scanning the pursuing vehicles. She spotted a weak point in their formation and pointed it out to Elias. "There! If we can take out the lead speeder, the others will falter." Elias nodded, his jaw set with determination. He swung the speeder around, heading straight for the lead pursuer. At the last moment, he veered to the side, narrowly avoiding a collision. Zanara reached out, her hand brushing against the lead speeder's hull. With a quick motion, she disabled its engine, sending it spiraling out of control. The other speeders scattered, their formation breaking as they tried to avoid the wreckage. Elias took advantage of the chaos, weaving through the streets with expert precision. As they neared the outskirts of the city, the pursuit began to wane. The Imperial forces were reluctant to venture too far from the capital, and soon, the speeders fell back. Elias let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "We made it." Zanara nodded, her expression grim. "For now, but they won't stop coming." Elias glanced at her, his eyes filled with admiration. "You were incredible back there." Zanara met his gaze, her violet eyes softening. "We make a good team." Elias smiled faintly. "Yeah, we do." The safe house was a modest building hidden in the dense forest on the outskirts of the city. The rebels were waiting for them, their expressions a mix of relief and tension. "You made it," the rebel leader said, his voice gruff but appreciative. "But the Empire won't let this go. They'll be hunting you." Elias nodded. "We know, but we're not done yet." The rebel leader studied him for a long moment, then said, "What do you need?" Elias glanced at Zanara, then back at the rebel leader. "We need to hit them where it hurts. We need to strike at the heart of the Empire." The rebel leader's eyes gleamed with a fierce light. Then let's get to work. The rebel safe house was a stark contrast to the opulence of the imperial palace. Nestled deep within the dense forests on the outskirts of the capital, it was a place of rough-hewn walls and flickering lanterns, where the air smelled of earth and pine. For Zanara, it was a sanctuary, a place where she could breathe freely for the first time in what felt like an eternity. But even here, the shadow of the Empire loomed large. The rebels had welcomed her and Elias with cautious respect, their eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. They were a motley crew, united by their hatred of the Empire and their desire for freedom. Their leader, a grizzled veteran named Drax, had listened intently as Elias outlined their plan to strike at the heart of the Empire. "It's a bold move," Drax had said, his voice gravelly but tinged with admiration. "But bold moves are what win wars." Now, as Zanara sat by the fire in the safe house's main hall, she felt the weight of their mission pressing down on her. The flames cast flickering shadows on the walls, and the low murmur of the rebels' voices provided a soothing backdrop to her thoughts. But her mind was far from calm. Elias entered the hall, his expression thoughtful. He had been busy coordinating with the rebels, planning their next move. But now, he took a moment to sit beside Zanara, his presence a comforting anchor in the storm. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his voice soft. Zanara glanced at him, her violet eyes reflecting the firelight. "I've been through worse," she said, her tone wry. "But this is different." Elias nodded, his gaze fixed on the flames. "I know. The stakes are higher now, but we're not alone anymore. We have allies, and we have each other." Zanara felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. She had spent so much of her life fighting alone, relying on no one but herself. But with Elias, it was different. He had shown her that she didn't have to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything." Elias turned to her, his eyes filled with a quiet intensity. "You don't have to thank me, Zanara. I'm in this because I believe in you. Because I believe in us." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world seemed to fade away. The fire, the rebels, the Empire, all of it disappeared, leaving only the two of them. Zanara felt a pull, a magnetic force drawing her closer to Elias. She leaned in, her lips brushing against his in a kiss that was both tender and fierce. It was a kiss born of desperation and hope, of two souls finding solace in each other amidst the chaos of their lives. But even as they lost themselves in each other, they knew that their time was limited. The Empire's spies were everywhere, and their every move was being watched. They couldn't afford to let their guard down, not even for a moment. The next morning, the rebels gathered in the safe house's war room, a cramped space filled with maps and holographic displays. Drax stood at the head of the table, his expression grim. "The Empire's forces are mobilizing," he said, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. "They know we're here, and they're coming for us." Elias stepped forward, his eyes scanning the faces of the rebels. "Then we need to hit them first. We need to strike at their supply lines, cripple their ability to wage war." Drax nodded. "Agreed, but it won't be easy. Their defenses are strong, and they'll be expecting us." Zanara spoke up, her voice calm but commanding. "Then we'll have to be smarter than them. We'll use their own tactics against them." The rebels turned to her, their expressions a mix of respect and curiosity. Zanara had proven herself in battle, and her words carried weight. "What do you propose?" Drax asked. Zanara activated the holographic display, her fingers moving deftly over the controls. The map shifted, zooming in on a series of supply depots near the capital. "Here," she said, pointing to a specific location. "This is where they're storing their weapons and fuel. If we can destroy these depots, we'll cripple their ability to launch an offensive." Drax studied the map, his eyes narrowing. "It's a risky move, but if we pull it off, it could turn the tide of the war." Elias nodded. "Then let's make it happen." The mission was a blur of tension and adrenaline. Zanara and Elias led a small team of rebels through the dense forest, their movements swift and silent. The supply depots were heavily guarded, But the rebels moved with precision, taking out the sentries one by one. As they reached the first depot, Zanara signaled for the team to halt. She studied the layout, her mind racing. "We'll need to disable the security system before we can plant the charges," she whispered. Elias nodded, his expression focused. "I'll take care of it." He moved forward, his movements swift and precise. He reached the control panel, his fingers flying over the keys as he disabled the security system. The lights on the panel flickered and died, and Elias signaled for the team to move in. Zanara led the way, her senses on high alert. They reached the fuel tanks, and the rebels quickly planted the charges. As they moved to the next depot, Zanara felt a surge of adrenaline. They were so close. But as they reached the final depot, the alarm sounded. The Empire's forces had discovered their presence, and the rebels were quickly surrounded. "We're outnumbered," Elias said, his voice tense. "We need to fall back." Zanara shook her head, her eyes burning with determination. "No, we finish this." She moved forward, her movements swift and deadly. She took out the guards with precision, her every move a testament to her skill and training. The rebels followed her lead, their determination unwavering. As the final charge was planted, Zanara signaled for the team to retreat. They moved quickly, their footsteps muffled by the chaos of the battle. As they reached the edge of the forest, the charges detonated, the explosion lighting up the night sky. The forest was alive with the sounds of rebellion, the crackle of energy weapons, the roar of explosions, and the cries of the wounded echoed through the trees, a symphony of chaos and defiance. The rebels had struck a devastating blow to the Empire's supply lines, but the cost had been high. Now, as the Imperial forces closed in, Zanara and Elias stood at the forefront of the resistance, their determination unwavering. The safe house had become a fortress, its walls reinforced with whatever materials the rebels could scavenge. The air was thick with tension, the rebels moving with a sense of purpose as they prepared for the final battle. Zanara moved among them, her presence a source of strength and inspiration. She had become a symbol of their fight, a warrior queen who had defied the Empire and lived to tell the tale. Elias stood by her side, his eyes scanning the horizon. He had spent the last few hours coordinating with the rebels, ensuring that every detail of their defense was in place. But now, as the first wave of Imperial forces appeared on the horizon, he felt a sense of calm settle over him. This was it, the moment they had been fighting for. "Are you ready?" Zanara asked, her voice steady. Elias nodded, his gaze fixed on the approaching forces. "As ready as I'll ever be." Zanara placed a hand on his arm, her touch sending a surge of warmth through him. "We'll get through this. Together." Elias turned to her, his eyes filled with a quiet intensity. Together. The battle began with a deafening roar as the Imperial forces launched their assault. The rebels fought with everything they had, their determination fueled by the knowledge that this was their last stand. Zanara moved through the chaos like a force of nature, her every move precise and deadly. She was a whirlwind of indigo and silver, her bioluminescent patterns glowing faintly in the dim light. Elias fought beside her, his movements swift and calculated. He had never been a warrior, but he had learned quickly, his determination to protect Zanara and the rebels driving him forward. Together, they were a formidable team, their bond giving them strength. As the battle raged on, the rebels began to gain the upper hand. The Imperial forces, caught off guard by the ferocity of the resistance, began to falter. But just as it seemed that victory was within reach, a new threat emerged. From the sky descended a squadron of Imperial dropships, their sleek designs a stark contrast to the chaos below. The ships landed in a clearing near the safe house, and from them emerged a figure that made Zanara's blood run cold. It was Kale, the former ally of Cryos who had betrayed her to the Empire. His eyes gleamed with malice as he stepped forward, his voice cutting through the noise of the battle. "Zanara," he called, his tone mocking. "You've caused quite a stir, but it's time to end this." Zanara's jaw tightened, her grip on her weapon tightening. "Kale, I should have known you'd show up." Kale smiled, his expression cruel. "You can't win, Zanara. The Empire is too powerful. But if you surrender now, I might be persuaded to spare your life." Zanara's eyes burned with defiance. "I'd rather die than kneel to you." Kale's smile faded, replaced by a look of cold fury. "Then die you shall." The battle between Zanara and Kale was a clash of titans, their movements swift and deadly. They fought with a ferocity that left the rebels and Imperial forces alike in awe, their every move a testament to their skill and determination. Elias watched from a distance, his heart pounding in his chest. He wanted to help Zanara, to protect her, but he knew that this was her fight. And so, he turned his attention to the Imperial forces, his every move calculated to give the rebels an edge. As the battle raged on, Zanara began to gain the upper hand. Kale was skilled, but he was no match for her determination and strength. With a final, powerful blow, she disarmed him, her weapon pressed against his throat. "This is for Cryos," she said, her voice cold and steady. Kale's eyes widened with fear. But before Zanara could deliver the final blow, a shot rang out. Kale's body went limp, his eyes staring blankly at the sky. Zanara turned to see Elias standing nearby, his weapon smoking. He met her gaze, his expression filled with a quiet intensity. "I couldn't let him hurt you," he said. Zanara nodded, her eyes softening. "Thank you." With Kale's death, the Imperial forces began to falter. The rebels, inspired by Zanara and Elias's bravery, fought with renewed vigor. Slowly but surely, they began to push the Imperial forces back, their determination unwavering. As the final Imperial soldier fell, a cheer rose from the rebels. They had done it. They had defied the Empire and emerged victorious. Zanara and Elias stood together, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The battle had been fierce, but they had emerged stronger than ever. Their bond, forged in the fires of rebellion, was unbreakable. As the sun rose over the battlefield, casting its golden light on the forest, Zanara turned to Elias. "We did it," she said, her voice filled with awe. Elias nodded, his eyes filled with a quiet pride. "We did, but this is just the beginning." Zanara smiled faintly. "Then let's make sure it's a beginning worth fighting for." As the chapter closes, Zanara and Elias stand together on the battlefield, their bond stronger than ever. The spark of rebellion has become a flame, and it burns brighter with every passing moment. But in the shadows, unseen and unheard, the Empire's spies are watching, their loyalty unwavering. The game is far from over, and the stakes have never been higher. But for now, they are together, their determination unwavering. The final stand was just the beginning, and the fight ahead will be their greatest challenge yet.